3 years, 4 months, and 11 days after I introduced Camille to my business attorney, I found a wire transfer confirmation in my own email, addressed to her from an account I didn't recognize for work I had allegedly approved. I hadn't approved anything. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what happened because the story only makes sense if you understand the version of myself I was living inside at the time. My name is Renata. I'm 38, a brand strategist based in Philadelphia. I spend my days telling companies who they are and what they stand for, which is either ironic or appropriate given how long it took me to do the same for myself. I have a studio apartment in Fishtown that costs more than it should, a decent car that I've been paying off for 2 years, and a client list I built from nothing after I walked away from a mid-sized agency at 31 to go independent. No safety net, no partner income, just the assumption, no, the conviction that I was good enough to make it work. For the most part, I was right. By 35, I was billing around $180,000 a year, handling 3 or 4 retainer clients at a time, doing project work in between. Not wealthy. Comfortable enough to have options, which is a different thing entirely. My morning routine is the same almost every day. 6:15, I'm up. Coffee, black, in the mug my friend Dana gave me that reads, "Not a morning person, just a person." 40 minutes of walking the neighborhood before the city fully wakes up. I'm back at my desk by 8. I work in silence until noon, then eat lunch at the kitchen island while reading something that has nothing to do with marketing. It's a deliberate reset. My therapist suggested it years ago, and I've kept the habit even after stopping therapy. My professional life and my personal life have always been fairly well separated. I don't mix them unless the reason is extraordinary. Camille was extraordinary. We met at a conference in Austin 7 years ago. She was speaking on creative direction in consumer branding, and I was in the third row taking notes with the focused intensity of someone who still felt like an imposter at industry events. Her presentation was sharp without being showy. Afterward, I introduced myself at the coffee station. She laughed at something I said within the first 2 minutes. It was one of those rare professional encounters that tips sideways into genuine connection almost immediately. Over the following year, we stayed in touch the way you do when you've recognized something in another person. Irregular, but meaningful. Long emails, the occasional phone call that started with a quick question and ended 90 minutes later. When I moved to Philadelphia from DC, she helped me think through my client positioning. When her marriage ended, I was one of the first people she called. By year 3 of our friendship, she had become my closest professional confidant. I trusted her aesthetic instincts completely. She understood the emotional architecture of brand work, how a logo is never really about the logo, how a tagline is never really about the words. We thought alike, or I believed we did. 3 years ago, we started working together. Loosely at first. I'd bring her in for creative direction on accounts that needed more visual thinking than I could provide alone. She was freelance by then, building her own practice. The arrangement was informal. I'd pass her a percentage of what the client paid me. She'd deliver the work. We'd both maintain the relationship simple, efficient. I introduced her to 6 of my clients over 2 years. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. 6. The wire transfer I found was from March. I found it in May. It was only in my inbox because the client, a packaging company called Foundry, one of my first and most loyal retainers, had CC'd me on an internal forwarding chain. Someone in their accounting department had accidentally looped me in on a message confirming payment to Camille for a rebrand project. A rebrand project. Foundry had been my client for 4 years. Their account was worth $4,800 a month to me. The rebrand was a $38,000 project that I had proposed, scoped, and was in active discussion about with their VP of marketing, or so I thought. The last email I had from that VP was from 6 weeks earlier, saying they needed to discuss timeline internally before moving forward. 6 weeks of silence that I had filled in with the most generous possible interpretation, budget approval delays, competing priorities, normal corporate friction. The wire transfer was for $6,400, not the full project, just a deposit. The work had apparently already begun. I read the email 4 times. Then I opened my sent folder and found every proposal I'd ever submitted to Foundry. Then I opened a thread with Camille from that same week, where she had asked me casually, in a longer message about something else entirely, whether I was still pursuing the Foundry rebrand or letting it go. I had told her I was waiting to hear back. I had told her the door was still open. I sat very still for a long time. The apartment was quiet. Outside, someone's dog was barking at something it couldn't reach. I want to be honest about what I felt in those first minutes, because it was not the clean, righteous anger I would have preferred. It was confusion first, then a kind of searching, going back through months of small moments, trying to recalibrate them. The lunch in New York, where she had asked detailed questions about my client roster, just to understand your capacity. The time she mentioned offhandedly that Foundry was a great account for someone at her stage. The way she'd stopped asking about certain clients, the way you stop asking about something you already know. I had noticed none of it at the time. I had filed it under friendship, the natural interest of a close colleague. Then a harder question settled in, one that didn't have a comfortable answer. What was I getting out of this dynamic that made me so willing to not see it? Because Camille had told me, in various ways over the years, that she was more commercially ambitious than I was. She had said it admiringly almost, positioning me as the craftsperson and herself as the strategist. I had accepted that framing. It made me feel artistically pure. It made me feel that I had a partner who handled the parts of business I found distasteful. I had given her access, real access, and then congratulated myself on being generous. I wasn't being generous, I was being convenient. I didn't call her, I didn't text. I sat with what I knew for 2 days. And on the third day, I called my attorney. His name is Richard, and in 10 years of working together, he has seen me at various degrees of professional distress. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, "Forward me the chain." 2 days later, he confirmed what I already understood. Camille had approached Foundry directly. She'd represented herself as available for a rebrand, had subtly implied, and without stating outright, that she'd be working under my direction. She hadn't. The contract was between Foundry and her LLC alone. My name appeared nowhere. Richard said we had options. I told him I wanted to think. I called Camille on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember it was raining. I'd been sitting at my desk and I hadn't turned on the lights, so the room was gray and dim and my reflection was faint in the monitor. She answered on the second ring. Warm, familiar. The same voice. I said, "I got accidentally copied on an email from Foundry's accounting department." There was a pause, not long, maybe 3 seconds, but it was the wrong kind of pause. The kind that contains calculation rather than surprise. She said, "Oh, I was going to talk to you about that." I said, "Okay, I'm listening." What followed was a version of events I could recognize as structurally plausible while being emotionally false. She'd been in conversation with Foundry about unrelated work. They'd brought up the rebrand. She'd thought my interest had lapsed. She hadn't wanted to burden me with the details before anything was finalized. She said, "I should have been more transparent. I know that." She did not say, "I knew this was your client." She did not say, "I took something that was yours because I wanted it." I said, "You're right. You should have." And then I said, "I need some time to think about what this means for how we work together." She said, "Of course. I completely understand." Neither of us raised our voice. Neither of us cried. We said goodbye the same way we always had. The silence after I hung up was heavier than any argument could have been. Forgiveness is a strange word to apply to professional betrayal. It implies something happened in the emotional register alone, when in fact something had been taken. Opportunity, trust, income, the particular confidence of believing your inner circle is your inner circle. I did not go back to working with Camille. Richard sent a professional letter outlining the nature of the conflict of interest and requesting that she voluntarily remove herself from the Foundry engagement. She did. Foundry, to their credit, was embarrassed by the situation. We resumed our working relationship. The rebrand moved forward under my direction. The $6,400 deposit was returned. The friendship was not. I think about what I've learned from the experience differently depending on the day. Some days it feels like a clean lesson about access and boundaries and the difference between trust and exposure. Other days, it feels more complicated than that, like a slow portrait of two women who needed something from each other, and one of them eventually decided that what she needed was worth more than the agreement between them. I was not blameless. I had structured a professional dynamic that was opaque enough to be exploitable. I had rewarded closeness with access rather than with appropriate safeguards. I had been the kind of person who considered formality cold and paperwork a kind of distrust. The warmth I prided myself on was also a system with no locks. That's the line I come back to. Not with self blame, I'm careful about the difference, but with a kind of sober clarity. We don't speak now, it's not dramatic. No final message, no blocked numbers. I see her work sometimes in the margins of the industry. I feel something when I do, but it's quieter than I expected, more like weather than wound. Last fall, I revised every client agreement I use, added conflict of interest clauses, defined the terms of referral and access. It added 2 hours to my onboarding process, and it will never feel natural, and I will do it forever. I also started telling people, quietly, honestly, when something doesn't feel right. Not the elaborate, careful silence I held for 2 days before calling my attorney, just the faster, plainer version, the one that says something has shifted and I am paying attention. I'm sharing this because I think a lot of people in professional relationships and personal ones too are sitting inside a dynamic that they've quietly agreed not to examine too closely because it feels good, because the person matters, because the examination might cost more than the risk. Sometimes it costs more not to look. If there's someone in your life right now who has unusually generous access to the things you've built, your clients, your connections, your money, your reputation, I'd ask you to sit with one question. Is the warmth you feel for them doing the work that a boundary should be doing instead? You don't have to answer it out loud, but you should answer it honestly. The deposit cleared. The friendship didn't survive, and on balance, in the kind of arithmetic that doesn't fit neatly into a wire transfer confirmation, I think I came out ahead. Just not in the way I imagined it when I thought people like Camille were incapable of surprising me.